because he put himself above the law. But I guess those proceedings, the Constitution, FISA, they weren't on George Bush's summer reading list, just French novels. But the idea that a president as commander-in-chief is above the law not only has a sorry history, to wit, the Nixon impeachment, because Nixon was justifying all this stuff, a break-in Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office and all that other kind of stuff on grounds of national security. But we had a Supreme Court case on this subject, and it's really worth talking about briefly because of the background of the justice who wrote the most memorable decision in that case. It's a steel seizure case, and Harry Truman was during World War II. I'm sorry, the Korean War. And Harry Truman said, you know, the steel mills are about to go on strike, and what am I going to do for steel, for the bullets and the tanks and the planes and the guns that we need to fight the North Koreans? So I'm going to seize these steel mills, and I'm commander-in-chief. Well, the Supreme Court said, Mr. President, you are commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy, but you are not commander-in-chief of the country. Big difference. But the critical thing to remember about that opinion is that Justice Jackson, who wrote it, was the chief U.S. prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials. And he alluded to that in that decision. He said, basically, if we go down this path where a president can put himself above the law, then we are down the path of military dictatorship, which we have just seen in Europe. He had seen it at Nuremberg, and he was seeing executive misuse of power, and he said no. And that should be resonating deeply with us. So we have a president who's put himself above the law with respect to FISA. We have a president who's put himself above the law with respect to the Geneva Conventions. Those are quaint and obsolete. By the way, it's worth remembering. Here's another historical factoid. The Geneva Conventions were ratified under Dwight D. Eisenhower, and before they were ratified, they were voluntarily announced to be adhered to by Douglas MacArthur, Chief of U.S. Forces. Now, no one ever called either one of these generals wimps. They thought the Geneva Conventions were critical for our military forces and for America as a moral force. It took two guys who ran away from a war, who were AWOL, Messrs. Bush and Cheney. Not to understand the moral and legal significance of the Geneva Conventions. But the president says, they're obsolete. I'm above the law. Number one, I can authorize mistreatment of detainees. And number two, despite in violation not just of the Geneva Conventions, there are U.S. laws to carry out the Geneva Conventions, the War Crimes Act, so I'm above the law. Listen, I don't have to obey FISA. I don't have to obey the War Crimes Act. And I don't have to obey the Anti-Torture Act. I'm president. And he got Justice Department to write a memo saying he's above the law. And we got a new Attorney General who says they don't have to, if the Justice Department said the president's above the law, then they don't have to follow, then they're exempt. Hear of the Nuremberg defense? Just following orders. I was just told to torture. What's the difference? I don't make up my own mind. So this is where we've come to. And the real danger is if this president can so abuse the law, whether it's authorizing torture in violation of statutes or refusing to hold those accountable in violation both of his oath of office and the Geneva Conventions, then where does the next president stop? Maybe it's not just those people who were found on foreign battlefields, or even U.S. citizens. Maybe it's Liz Holtzman, because I wrote a book saying Bush should be impeached. Maybe I can be thrown in prison. Everyone in this room can be thrown in prison. We were at this meeting. Bruce, fine. Maybe they won't touch him. He's He's a very honorable guy and a Republican. Scott Hort, he's in trouble. We were all in trouble. So what's to stop them? If a president is above the law, what is to stop him or her? Nothing. That's why we have a Constitution, rule of law. You can't put your political enemies in prison. Richard Nixon tried to harass his political enemies. It was one of the grounds for impeachment. It was a no-no. Where are we today? Where are we in terms of protecting our liberties? And driving us into a war, I just want to mention one other thing. Driving us into a war on the basis of lies, exaggerations, and misstatements. How does that subvert the Constitution? Bruce already alluded to the structure of the Constitution, which doesn't just give the president the war-making powers. The president has basically one power with regard to war-making. He's commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy. Congress is about 5 or 6, declaring war, making rules for the conduct of war, raising money to support armies and navies, not to mention everything necessary and proper for doing all those things. Now, why did the framers split this up? We know that they like checks and balances. We learned that in the 4th grade. But this wasn't just an abstract check and balance. This was because, as Madison explained in a letter to Jefferson, presidents, executives, monarchs, and they knew their history, loved to take countries into unnecessary wars. And so if we gave Congress some powers, that would be a check on this historical tendency that they were afraid of. So when a president lies to Congress, he is undoing and subverting Congress's power to play an equal role or a serious role to understand the facts and to make a reasoned decision. He subverted, that's a great and dangerous offense, in my opinion, that subverts the Constitution. There are many other things that this president has done, signing statements. He has issued more than 700 signing statements saying he's not going to carry out the laws. The General Accounting Office has looked at that. They've decided he has not carried out many of the laws. Here we go. Again, a president putting himself above the law. It is up to us to protect our democracy, to send a clear message to this president and to future presidents that they must uphold the law, that we are not going down the road of military dictatorship, that we're not going down the road of tyranny, that we're going to preserve our liberties and the rule of law and our constitutional democracy. That is what kept this country going for 200 years plus. Now, maybe some people think because it's 200 years old, we should just junk it. Obsolete. I'm not one of those, and we haven't found anything better. And if we don't run them out of office before the end of office, and if presidents think that they can get away with violating blatantly and openly and notoriously the rules of law of this country, the actual statutes of this country, then God help us about where we're going to be. So thank you all for coming and for your commitment to this.
Thank you. It's great to have the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. And I wondered, after the presentations we heard by Liz and Bruce, is there anything else to be said in support of impeachment proceedings? And the answer is, hell yes. In fact, we could meet here for hours and hours without exhausting the list of things. And it seems to me maybe it's best to start just with yesterday, one day. Start just with yesterday. This president yesterday vetoed the Intelligence Authorizations Act of 2008, and he issued a signing statement. I picked up the New York Times this morning, and I read an interesting headline. He's establishing his legacy, says the Times. He's establishing his legacy as a strong, powerful leader in vetoing this act. And what does he say when he vetoes it? He says, this act makes a mistake because it bars torture. And torture is essential to make us free. Torture is essential to keep us safe.